Welcome to episode 6 of Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Chelsea Sherrod, and joining us today is MLB.com's Anthony DiComo and Elite Sports New York's Matt Musico. And we are going to talk all things Mets over the next half an hour. You can also use this as your Mets therapy session. We will also be taking in some fan questions live as they come in, so make sure you send those in for us. But first, welcome to the show, Anthony and Matt. How you guys doing?
Doing good. How are you?
No, we are riding the ship right now. We're just trying to make it through. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good. I'm hanging in as much as I can after a 1-5 road trip, but such is life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get into the road trip. But first, this is how the Mets spent their last off day, which was about a week ago before that road trip of the 2 series. So Kodai Senga, he got some new shoes at Kith. Mark Canha hung out with some 4th and 5th graders at PS 201Q in Queens. And Starling Marte posted his home run from the day before on Instagram to shout himself out a little bit. So, Anthony, which off day sounds the best to you?
I feel like I can fit all 3 of those into one off day. It's not that heavy of a lift, to be honest with you. But, I'm going to be a good person and say I think Mark Canha's was the best. Making a little difference in the world.
Matt?
I'd have to agree with that. I'm all for some outward visualization exercises from Marte because, gotta get moving. But not that I'm superstitious or anything. Canha was already hitting. He visited some 4th and 5th graders, and all of a sudden he started hitting some more. So I'm going to have to say, let's keep the good vibes going. Hopefully he's doing that again today. So this way he can keep hitting.
What a guy Mark Canha is. Okay. Let's get into where the Mets stand. So it's only been 1 week since the Mets' last off day and our last show, and it's been a long week. The Mets were swept by the Braves in Atlanta, and then they only took 1 game of 3 from the Pirates. Anthony and Matt, in the perfect world, we could just pretend like the Braves series didn't even happen, so we're going to try to do that. Just like Gary Cohen said, I don't know what rock bottom feels like, but this seems like it's awfully close. So, Anthony, starting with you, let's move on to the Pirates. What did you see out of the team's weekend series against Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I saw not enough hitting and not good enough starting pitching. I mean, it's very simple. That's kind of been the story of most of the year. The rotation that we thought was going to be a strength has been really one of the worst rotations in baseball. And part of that obviously was the injuries that affected them early. But of course, even since Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander have been back and healthy members of the rotation, Carlos Carrasco as well, they're just not providing enough value. They're not going deep into games. They're not striking out enough batters. They're not limiting home runs well enough. They're really not doing any of the things that go into being a good rotation. So it all starts with that. You can quibble with other areas. You can quibble with the bullpen. To me, if the rotation is doing what it's supposed to do, a lot of that noise goes away. And then the offense has, again, been a season-long thing, and we saw it again in this Pirates series. Yeah, they came back and scored 7 runs. I believe it was on Friday to make a blowout look like a little bit less of a blowout, but it really still wasn't enough. And the other games, they just did not put enough runs on the board. Without Pete Alonso, it's been glaring. Even when Pete Alonso was healthy, at times it was glaring, especially when he was the only one doing anything to drive in runs. Now he's not there, and Francisco Lindor, frankly, is not picking up the slack. Brandon Nimmo is having a nice season, but he's not being that guy. Jeff McNeil has not been that guy, and none of the supplementary pieces to that core have been it. It didn't happen this weekend, and for me, it was kind of like a microcosm of the entire season because it was just really an extension of what they've already shown us.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, what did you see against the Pirates?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this is like the definition of acting like a goldfish, right? Like the old Ted Lassoism. So. But it's kind of hard to, like, nobody on Mets Twitter is going to forget that Brave series either. So I think, thinking about the only positive, I guess, semi-positive that's come out of this is that after losing 14-7 on Friday, saying, hey, we only lost by a touchdown instead of more than that, like, that's not great. But the bullpen gave up 5 runs that night, and then it didn't give up any more runs the rest of the weekend. So even with Senga had some good length, but outside of lack of length on Sunday, they at least showed a little bit of an ability to keep the opponent at bay, even though the offense couldn't pick things back up too. So, I mean, I think that's got to be the only real positive coming out of this series and having an off day before starting again tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get into the rotation a little bit. But let's get to an update from the ownership. So Steve Cohen did an interview with the Post recently, and it revealed a little bit more about his management style in his third season owning the team. So we're going to take a closer look at some of the quotes and peel back the curtain a little bit. So I'll have a quote for each of you, and then you can kind of weigh in on them. So Anthony, starting with you, one of the most telling quotes about Cohen's approach was when he said, "When things get really bad, I'm not going to blow up." Anthony, do you think that that's the right approach for this team right now?
Look, I'm probably in the minority here in that I agree with that, because I always agree with that. I feel like, especially when you hire a new front office, when you hire a new management team, you have to give them a little chance and a little space to work. And I understand that Billy Epler's front office hasn't really made it work so far, but they did win 101 games last year. And I do think you have to kind of give him another trade deadline, another season. And then once you get to the end of it, if it really didn't work out the way you wanted, that's maybe after 2 years, the time when you reevaluate and say, is this the direction we want to keep going, or should we go another way? The other part of that, of course, is the on-field manager. And again, I think you kind of have to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. This is a team that won 101 games last year. I understand the quibbles with what has gone on so far this year. But this is a veteran manager. This is not some guy that you picked up off the street and you can so easily discard. I would also kind of give him the rest of the season and then you reevaluate. I understand the idea that, maybe you are kind of setting yourself for a lost season that way, but it's on the players. And I've never really been of the school of thought that just changing a manager or just making a firing a coach or doing one of those things for the sake of doing it is really going to light that much of a fire under the players. They know it's not like they're not trying. They know what they need to do. And I understand the counterexamples. Everyone wants to point to the Phillies last year as a counterexample. I think that's more than an exception to the rule. I think teams that are generally going to make the playoffs make it regardless. Those that are going to miss regardless. So yeah, I'm not sure what a bunch of yelling and screaming and ultimately firing people accomplishes at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective to have. And frankly, I agree with you on that, Anthony. Let's get to the next quote for you, Matt. Cohen says, "It's a moment in time and it doesn't look good. It looks pretty bad right now, but this is not a bad team." Matt, is that how you also assess this team at this moment? It looks like we lost Matt for a quick second. So Anthony, actually, I'll ask you. So in that quote, "It's a moment in time and it doesn't look good," Cohen says, "It looks pretty bad right now, but this is not a bad team." How do you assess that quote, Anthony? And I'll go to Matt.
I mean, I think it's a good roster is what Steve Cohen is saying. And it better be for $375 million. But that's kind of my point, going back to the previous answer about, keeping the status quo as far as management goes, is this is not up to Buck Showalter. This is up to Francisco Lindor and Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso. Go on down the line. It's up to Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, these guys who are making huge money. They're the ones that need to be better. And I really find it hard to believe that someone like a Scherzer or a Verlander is going to look up one day and be like, "Oh, gee, they fired Buck Showalter. I guess I got to pitch better now." No, they're trying, they're searching for these answers. And that's what it comes down to, is this $375 million roster, this quote unquote good team, actually starting to act that way.
Yeah, it's just like the gift that just isn't giving or isn't really giving yet. Matt, do you have any thought on that quote from Cohen saying it looks pretty bad right now, but this is not a bad team?
I think it's easy to say yes, easy to say no, depending on which school of thought you're thinking about. I mean, like Anthony said, they didn't spend all this money and construct this roster over the winter thinking, "Oh man, we might be pretty bad this year." They're going for it. They're trying to win. They just won 101 games last year too. But Major League Baseball is also a results-oriented business, and right now the results are not good. The hitting has not been up to par. Their team OPS is in the latter half, the lower half of the league, and their pitching has not been good overall, especially the rotation as well. So, I mean, I think two things can be true. I mean, they think that they're capable of better. We pretty much hear them say that almost every night out of the clubhouse after another disappointing loss. But at the same time, right now, yeah, they're playing like a bad team. But we can hope that things get better and things start to turn around. But right now, it's not good. But also at the same time, with Cohen saying he's not going to blow up, not make these wholesale changes, which I agree with Anthony's point of view on that as well, too. If you're not going to do that, though, what else are you going to say? There's really nothing else that you can say in that situation.
Right. It seems like there obviously needs to be a change. It's just in regards to what that change is. And this is just a really long bump in the road that we hope they can get over pretty soon. One last quote from Cohen. And he says, I'm going to rate my success on our ability to develop talent in the farm system, because I think that's how you develop sustainable winners. Anthony, we'll start with you. Are you encouraged by the Mets farm system as it stands right now? And how long do you think it will take for it to be at the level Cohen wants it to be at?
I would say a little. You want a little more out of there. And mostly I'm talking about the pitching side of things, because the Mets have, as we've seen this year with Francisco Alvarez, Brett Baty, Mark Vientos coming up. Baty and Vientos haven't done that much yet, but I still think those are three good players for you long-term, or at the very least, three players who can help you out. But pitching-wise, you still sit here and you wonder where it comes from. So until that no longer becomes an issue, I can't just have a full-throated support of the farm system and how it has developed. That being said, Cohen's only in his third year of ownership. He's been here for 2.5 years-ish. He's had 2 drafts under his watch. It really probably takes about 5 years, half a decade, to evaluate how a GM, how a scouting director has done in these drafts. So it requires the type of patience that is hard to have, and that certainly many members of the fan base can struggle to have, and rightfully so, over the course of a given year when things are going wrong. But to really evaluate how it has gone, how this mission has gone of creating a self-sustaining unit, self-sustaining organization, you probably need at least another 2-3 years to really have an answer to that.
Yeah, patience is a lot to ask from some New Yorkers, Anthony, but I respect
myself
it.
Too.
Matt, how do you feel about the Mets farm system right now?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say also another 2 to 3 years as well, too, because of that pitching. Like, we've seen these young position players come and get promoted, some of them already making an impact. But out of MLB.com's top 10 Mets prospects, 5 of them are pitchers, but only 2 of them are above single A. So, I mean, it's going to take time to have that kind of depth in the upper minors to feel comfortable pulling guys from double A, triple A, and inserting them into the big leagues. And we've seen, we know that Cohen wants to be like the East Coast version of the Dodgers, and teams like the Astros and the Rays have shown that, consistent development, it takes time, but it reaps benefits as well too. So, I mean, it's going to take at least another 2 to 3 years just solely because of the pitching. And that's why they spent so much money on pitching over the winter as well too.
Yeah, valid points from both of you. Okay, we do have a fan question, and it comes from JP Murphy on YouTube. And he says, are we dealing at the All-Star break or buying? Could we add Daniel Murphy for old time's sake? Matt, let's start with you.
Well, I think right now, as bad as it is, they're like 9.5 games behind the Braves in the East, but they're I don't know where they are in the wild card race, but it's probably not more than like 5 or 6 games. It's very doable with these expanded playoffs. The teams that maybe that would not be contenders in the past are still viewing themselves as potential contenders, get a little spot, go in the back door and get that last spot or two. So I don't think at this point, I don't think anyone's thinking about dealing right now. If it continues to slog on like it has, have one of those typical June swoons that everyone's worried about, I think it could get to that point. And with regard to Murph, I mean, he's hitting. It's not going to cost very much. I mean, I'm sure people would, in a heartbeat, trade out Vogie and put Murph in there instead, just to see what happens, right?
Yeah, I don't hate that left-handed bat off the bench. Why not? But in regards to selling at the trade deadline, I don't think there's any scenario in which that happens, even if they lose their next 20 games in a row. I don't think it happens. It just right now they're 3 games out of a wild card spot, which tells you about the state of the National League. To Matt's point, you're really never going to be out of it. With a $375 million payroll, your team is never going to be bad enough that you're going to be truly out of it, truly out so far back that you cannot conceivably make a run, as teams such as the Phillies last year, the Braves 2 years ago, have shown. And now with the expanded playoffs and extra spot, it's that much easier. And the other part of it, it's not as if the Mets have all these great assets to sell. Like, they have a $375 million payroll. What are they going to do? Sell off Mark Canha to save, a pocket change over the course of half a season? It doesn't really make sense. You're not going to be able to trade your biggest ticket underperformers, whether that's Lindor or Scherzer or Verlander. Like, you would have to eat significant portions of that money to trade those types of guys. So there's really not a scenario in which it makes sense to trade. They don't have the assets to trade. And even if there's a 1% chance that you could get on some sort of run and go for it, I think given all that they have invested in this team, that's the only path that makes sense.
Okay, let's get into some other early deadline options, and starting with the bullpen. Matt, you recently wrote that Alexis Diaz, brother of Edwin, seems like, in your words, a pipe dream right now because of what the team would have to give up for him. Are there any prospects that you wouldn't mind parting with for Diaz?
Well, it all depends on what the Reds want. And from what we've heard so far with reports, I think it was John Heyman who shared that report last week about the Mets at least starting to lay the foundation with potentially making a run at Alexis, that the Reds want young pitching. We don't know how young, we don't know what kind of pitching they're looking for, and things like that. So I think that kind of depends a little bit. But if you look at the Reds situation, Diaz isn't even going to be arbitration eligible, I think, for another couple of years. He's not going to be a free agent until 2028. This is the time for a small market team to hold on to a stud like that. So if they're going to get him pried out of their hands, they're going to ask for the world. So, I mean, I would think, if you look at those top 10 prospects and specifically looking at their young pitching, like, okay, maybe like a Tidwell or someone like that could be something that would be easier to part with because you don't necessarily know what they're going to be just yet. But at the same time, the Reds appear to be on the upswing. I saw Jolly Olive share something on Twitter today. He said that the Reds and the Mets have the same record, but the vibes are very, very different right now in the clubhouse. It seems like the Reds are in a much different spot than the Mets are, but they have the same record. So, I mean, it seems like they're going to be more apt to hold on to someone like that, and the Mets would have to overwhelm them dramatically to make any kind of deal, which we've seen last year and the year before that they haven't been willing to do for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and Anthony, do you see any potential power options that the Mets may be keeping an eye on before the deadline next month?
Yeah, it's not a great year to be searching for power bats at the deadline. Certainly the bullpen will be easy enough to upgrade. I don't think Alexis Diaz is a realistic option for all the reasons Matt just discussed. But power bats, you look at who's not contending, and there's a reason why these teams are not contending. The A's are an obvious sell candidate. They don't have much to sell. Brent Rooker's the one who stands out, and he does, by the way, have a Mississippi State connection. He went there, which should appeal to Buck Showalter. I could see the Mets making a move at the margins like that. Adam Duvall in Boston just got healthy. If the Red Sox fall out of it, that's a guy I thought the Mets might have been on this past winter. They weren't really in on him for their bench or part-time role type of thing. They signed Tommy Pham instead, but I could see that. Joey Meneses in Washington is a guy who could become available. He's of some intrigue. CJ Cron in Colorado, I would tend to put on that list, but he's been not healthy, and you don't know when he's coming back. So these names I know are not standing out, but that's because there's not that one guy other than Shohei Ohtani who I really don't see being traded. You can say that's going to make a massive impact on our team. So I think it's going to be tough for the Mets to upgrade in that area. I think their trade deadline is going to probably have to center a little bit more around pitching, and then hope that your lineup, which you thought was a really good lineup at the beginning of the year, can kind of return to that form.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get into this rotation a little bit. Another big quote from Cohen in his recent interview was when he said, "You can't win games if your pitcher goes 3 innings, 4 innings. You just can't." And in the Mets' last 6 games, only Kodai Senga has made it through 6 innings. And of course, that coming after he just went 2 2/3 innings after that being his first game on regular rest. So with that, let's do some one word and why on this rotation. And Matt, we'll start with you. Max Scherzer.
Letdown. Specifically thinking about that Braves started out real hot. He ended up having his 111th career double-digit strikeout game. Looked really sharp through the first. I think it was like 4+ innings, and then things just started to come crashing down in the middle innings, which was the theme in Atlanta pretty much. So I mean it was definitely a letdown based off of how well he started.
Okay, Anthony.
I'm going to say hopeful, only because before that Atlanta started, and I totally get what Matt's saying, but before that, he had been a lot better. And before that, when he was going through the injuries, the suspension, I think there was a huge place where you could say, oh, geez, okay, this guy's 38 years old. He's about to be 39. The velocity is down. He really doesn't look anything like a 3-time Cy Young Award winner. And on top of that, he'd been dealing with more and more injury things really dating as far back as 2019. So you could see a scenario in which this was kind of it for Max Scherzer, and he just wasn't going to be that guy again. But then he had a 3-4 start stretch where he was that guy, and it looked a lot better. It ended last time out in Atlanta, but that at least gives me a little bit of hope that there's plenty left in the tank and that he can become that guy once again.
Yeah, we appreciate the optimism, Anthony. That's why we have you here. All right, Justin Verlander, who went 3 innings in his last start, giving up 5 runs. Anthony, what's your one word for him?
Old. I mean, he's a couple years older than Scherzer, a year and a half older or so, and he's looking a little bit like it. I think whenever you have a guy go through a patch of struggles like this, really at any point in their mid-30s and on, you say, okay, is this a mechanical thing? Is this just a cold streak? Or is this the end? Is this the beginning of the end? And I think for a guy like Justin Verlander, who's been so good, won a Cy Young Award at age 39, you don't expect to drop off a cliff. And this hasn't been a drop off a cliff. It just hasn't been what we would expect from Justin Verlander. So, yeah, I definitely, from the Mets perspective, would have some apprehension that this guy's not going to be worth the $43.3 million. But again, it's one of those, what can you do? You kind of have to hope that he still is young enough to make this work and maybe not win a Cy Young for you, but be a solid top or even top to mid end of the rotation type of starter, because they don't need the world from Justin Verlander. They just need him to be good and solid and be able to go that 7 innings more often than not.
Yeah. Matt, how about you? Justin Verlander?
I'm going to go with inconsistent. If you look at his last 5 starts, he's on this every other start is a good one trend, or at least a more acceptable one. So, I mean, it's obviously like all the points that Anthony said, it's not what the Mets are paying for, not what they hoped for. He's at least in the rotation, which is the opposite of what Jacob deGrom would be, or what he was last year, at least. So, like, that's a positive. You have the pitcher in there actually throwing every 5 days, but you just need that more consistent performance from him.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Kodai Senga went 7 innings in his last start, nearly stellar, giving up just 1 run. Matt, what's your word for him?
Refreshing. I think this was his 6th start on the road, and it was the first time it was a quality start. It was obviously, we've seen very big discrepancies between his home starts and his road starts for the most part. So it was nice to be able to see him have a good start away from Citi Field. And he still had the 4 walks, but it's a little bit easier to manage that kind of traffic when you only give up 2 hits over 7 innings.
Yeah, and I'm going to say intriguing, because this is a guy who, when he's going good, like he was that last time out, you're like, wow. I mean, this is it, right? This is frontline stuff. How can anybody hit this guy? But then he'll turn around 5-6 days later, and it'll look completely different. The walks are still a huge issue, even in that great start this weekend in Pittsburgh. There was that period where he walked 3 batters in a row, kind of out of nowhere, and had Brandon Nimmo not made that sensational catch at the wall, that's probably a 3-run double, and the outing looks completely different. We're talking about it in a totally different way today. So you got to see a lot more consistency from Senga. I'm a little skeptical that he has that sort of consistency in him because of the walks, because of the control issues. But the stuff is absolutely dynamite. Some of the swings and misses he gets are just kind of silly. So intriguing for sure what this guy can ultimately be over a full season.
Yeah, when he is on, he's on. Okay, Carlos Carrasco, Anthony, what's your word for him?
Unacceptable. Just the way that it has gone so far. You had some hope that when he came back from that elbow injury, which is not a small thing, by the way, he's still pitching with a bone spur in his elbow. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. But if you're going to be trusting Carlos Carrasco every 5 days to go out there, this not completing 5 innings, not completing 4 innings sometimes, it's just not enough. It's putting way too much of a strain on the bullpen. It's putting way too much of a strain on the other members of the rotation. Another guy who's getting up there in years, not quite Scherzer, Verlander age, but still at an age when a lot of guys experience precipitous decline. I'm worried about Carlos Carrasco, and right now, it just hasn't been up to snuff.
Yeah, Matt?
I'm going to go with sad. It just kind of makes me sad to see him struggle. He seems like a really good guy. I was on the cookie train at the start of last year thinking that he could bounce back, and he did. He had a nice year last year. And when they picked up his option, you thought, okay, like if he can do something close to that, that's great for the back end of this rotation. That's the kind of stabilization that you would want from a veteran arm that can typically eat innings when he's healthy. And he just hasn't given that length. He doesn't need to go 7-8 innings every time out, but you're kind of at this point, you're kind of just hoping for 5, maybe 6 decent innings, giving the Mets a shot to be able to win in the latter portion of the game. And for outside of that little short stretch when he came back from the injured list, that hasn't really happened.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk Tylor Megill. We're going to do that with a fan question that comes from Ethan KL from YouTube. And it says, what can the Mets do with the pitching spot Megill has in the rotation? Let's start with you, Anthony.
Yeah, it seems pretty clear that the Mets are going to skip Tylor Megill this next time out. It would be Friday against the Cardinals, which makes a lot of sense given Megill's results lately. Similar to what we were talking about with Carrasco. He's just not doing enough. He's not effective enough. He's not going deep enough into games. The question for me is, what do they do kind of short to medium term with him? Do they put him in the bullpen for a stretch and use him, in 2-3 inning stints down there? Or do they just flat out send him to AAA, have him stay stretched out in the rotation and be that option? I would guess they'll probably go the latter route only because they have so little starting pitching depth at the moment and they could use every arm that they have. But it's not as if Tylor Megill has, done a ton to deserve that sort of trust. So we'll see. I think right now, a lot of people would probably take Joey Lucchesi, take their chances with him in the rotation versus Megill. But as I said, I pretty much expect at this point the Mets to skip Megill, maybe call up a reliever, and then we'll see what they ultimately do with Megill, whether it's in the big league bullpen or down in AAA.
Yeah. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Again, I mean, it's kind of like what we've been saying, like, let's just hope it kind of gets better at this point. I mean, like, he's shown that he's been able to be effective in spurts. But then, again, like, you have Joey Lucchesi, you have David Peterson, like you have different options. And I think what a lot of Mets fans want is just something different at this point, because, the definition of insanity is just doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same results. Right. But at this point, it's like, all right, well, who else? Like, Lucchesi looked good in his debut and then not so much after that. And we all know how David Peterson struggled too. So, maybe we just give him a different look, a little bit of a reset, and that's it. But it's been tough for him the last few starts, and, he needs some kind of a reset. So hopefully skipping his start will at the very least be the beginning of that.
Yeah, we could talk about this rotation all day long, especially given how they've been playing. But let's get into something optimistic and positive. Francisco Alvarez and his daily dinger. So Francisco Alvarez is currently tied for second in the majors for home runs by a catcher with 12 and only 150 appearances. He's also the first catcher in MLB history with at least 10 home runs in his first 45 games under the age of 22. Talk about refreshing. So, Matt, you've seen your fair share of home runs, I'm sure, running the MLB Daily Dingers Twitter page. What do you see from Francisco Alvarez's moonshots that make him stand out?
I think it's just the confidence. Like, when you see him in the middle of an at-bat, like, you can see the swagger within his, like, body composition. Just like as he gets in and out of the batter's box, he sometimes does like the David Wright, like, tongue thing as well too. And like his eyes look like he just like is ready to demolish something and he expects to do it. And when he does, he's not surprised. So, I mean, like, that's the kind of like youthful cockiness, energy, swagger that this lineup needs. And we could talk all day about how Pete Alonso has been propping up this offense in many ways, especially in the power department. But let's think about like what could be happening if Francisco Alvarez has not been doing what he's been doing. And if you think about, I took a look before we hopped on here. Since 2010, he already has his 1.3 FWAR is already the fifth best among Mets catchers in the last almost decade and a half. And it's been 150 plate appearances or something like that. So like, it's pretty ridiculous the kind of impact he's made and the kind of confidence that he's built over such a short period of time.
Yeah. And so, Anthony, we've also seen Alvarez getting to slide in at DH on the days that he's been off behind the plate, hitting 2 home runs in his debut at that role. Do you think that Daniel Vogelbach has any chance to get another shot at DH, or has Alvarez kind of claimed that role when he's not catching?
Yeah, with Omar Narvaez healthy now, I think that's sort of, there was a fear that wasn't going to be the case, that Narvaez was going to kind of take half the catching playing time and Alvarez wouldn't really play on those other days, but he has played. Vogelbach hasn't been starting at DH recently, even against right-handed pitchers. So I do expect that trend to continue. Alvarez's OPS is 200 points higher than Vogelbach. His OPS against right-handed pitchers is more than 300 points higher than Vogelbach. So there's not really a case you can make to start Vogelbach over Alvarez at this point, as long as he continues hitting. And, I don't see that stopping. I think you have to have Alvarez in there on a daily basis, especially with Alonso out. He is your one thread at the lineup where he comes up and you're like, okay, this guy could go deep at any point. He's really the only player in the Mets lineup right now who you can say that about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we talked about Mark Canha a little bit earlier in the show, but Anthony, you tweeted yesterday that Canha has slashed a 317, 428, 513 in his last 15 games. He's also proved to be the catalyst in the Mets' only win last week. So, Anthony, what do you see differently in Mark now than you did at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, he just looks more like himself. He's hitting the ball harder, more consistently. He's not striking out. The patience at the plate is good. I think he's been doing this for longer than people realized, only because his numbers in April were so bad that once he started to pick it up a little bit, it was a slow burn. It wasn't like he broke out and hit 5 home runs over 2 weeks. No, it was, 1 for 3 with a double. It was 2 for 5 with an extra base hit. And that's been going on now for probably about 4 or 5 weeks. Whereas I think people have only really just kind of realized it in the last 2 weeks or so, really when he broke out against the Phillies and then again with another couple of big games this past weekend in Pittsburgh. But he's looked more like himself. I think it's the classic, reports of his demise were greatly exaggerated. This isn't the type of player who's going to carry your offense, but it's a really nice player to have at the bottom of your lineup when he's right. And right now it looks like he's right.
Yeah. Matt, let's talk about Mark Vientos, who's had a slow start to his time in the big league club. And we have a fan question, and it comes from Emily Przanowski from YouTube. And Emily says, how concerned should we be about the development of Vientos given his playing time? What do you think, Matt?
Well, I mean, it's been what, like maybe about a month since he's been up. I mean, I don't think it's something to worry about too much yet, but it's getting to the point where it's like, why the heck is this guy up here in the first place? And obviously with Pete out, like everyone kind of wants to see Vientos get some consistent playing time. We've seen how Alvarez and Beatty, especially at the beginning when he first started up and coming in and playing every day, how they were able to get acclimated after slow starts and then get moving and really produce. Like Vientos hasn't had that opportunity yet. But I also don't really know how much they even trust him at this point because, he's coming up in the 8th inning yesterday in a 2-1 game. He's able to hit home runs and he gets pinch hit for Guillorme, who doesn't necessarily hit home runs because it's like a lefty-righty platoon situation. So it's like, let him, like, what do you have to lose at that point? Let him try and figure it out. Like, this is why this kid is up here. So, I mean, if he's not going to get an extended look, you might as well send him back down to AAA so he can at least play every day. Because that's what Buck said at the beginning was his biggest fear. And they're kind of just doing that right now. So hopefully starting this week, he'll be able to get in the lineup in some way, in a consistent way, so he can actually get his feet underneath him.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on while Pete is out. Okay, so looking ahead now, the Mets have a short 2-game set with the Yankees tomorrow and Wednesday, where Pete Alonso and Aaron Judge will both be absent. And the team has their 2 aces going in Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. Before we get into your X factors for the series, Anthony, starting with you, do you have a favorite memory from the Mets-Yankees rivalry?
I mean, the memory that stands out the most is definitely Luis Castillo's dropped pop-up. As far as, I think most impactful moments from a Mets standpoint, it would have to be David Wright's walk-off against Mariano Rivera in 2006. I was not yet on the beat covering the Mets, but I certainly remember as a baseball fan watching that and thinking, okay, like this is more than just a walk-off hit against one of the greatest closers of all time. This is sort of like a pronouncement that the Mets are here and they're no longer baby brother. They're here to compete. So I think that David Wright walk-off was just massive in terms of the rivalry.
Yeah, I love that. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few. Definitely that David Wright one's a great one. I remember Matt Franco earlier in the early 2000s having a walk-off hit. I was at the game in 2013 where Lucas Duda walked off on Mariano Rivera as well, too, which I'm sure nobody really expected to actually happen. So that was probably my favorite moment, especially because the game before that I went to, I think, was a Russell Wilson walk-off. Or not Russell Wilson, Russell Martin walk-off at Yankee Stadium. So it was definitely the about face for me seeing things in person for sure.
Love that. Okay, so let's get into your X factors for this Subway series. Matt, what do you got?
I mean, we've got Scherzer and Verlander on the hill. Like, if you drew this up in any other way before the season started, you'd be lying. Like, this is exactly what the Mets would have probably wanted for this 2-game series. I mean, and obviously the Yankees are I think it's Severino and Cole as well too. So it's two primo pitching matchups as well. So like this is what you pay these guys for. Obviously, it's a middle of the season, regular season game, but obviously Subway Series means a little bit more to fans, even if they don't want to admit it with how bad things have been recently. So you want to be able to see them, step up to the plate or step up to the mound and toe the slab and produce the way that people want them to produce. So I think they're the X factors.
Yeah. Anthony?
For me, an X factor, I think, is Brett Baty. He hasn't produced the way that the Mets would have hoped. He was great early, hasn't really been so much lately, and I think he's gotten a pass for two reasons. One is that he's so young, obviously. He's so untested, so you tend to give young players a pass. But two, I think the fan base really likes this guy, and rightfully so. They consider him a big part of the future. But he has been a big part of this lineup, and he needs to produce a little more against two tough right-handed pitchers this week. Maybe this can be his coming out party, much in the way that we just spoke about David Wright all those years ago.
Yeah, and the Mets need a series win, so this will be huge for them. Okay, last question for you both. Anthony, how are you spending your off day?
Oh, you don't want to know. I've got a dentist appointment in a few hours. Some off day, right?
That sounds so much fun.
Yeah, it's real life. It's adulting. Unfortunately, these are the things we have to do.
That's right. Gotta keep that smile nice. Okay, Matt, what about you?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not jealous of that. I mean, I'm still. It's an off day for the Mets, but I'm working, and school's almost out here, so my two kids are home earlier than expected, so I got to juggle them around too.
Okay, well, being very responsible adults, I appreciate you both. I won't be as responsible today, but I'll try to be a little bit productive. Okay, thank you all so much for watching this latest edition of Mets Off Day Live. We will be back with another episode on Thursday, June 12th at 12 p.m. Yes, 2 off days in 1 week. For Anthony and Matt, I'm Chelsea Sherrod. Thank you so much for tuning in and enjoy your day.